This is our special needs journey or our special needs life. I always forget what name I used as our names on different social media platforms. But here on YouTube, I have been posting a lot of random videos over the last couple of months. Reels. I haven't really done a whole lot of actual YouTube videos with me talking and introducing who I am and like what this platform is for, what this channel is for. So I'm going to do a little bit of a backstory on our special needs life. And it's very complex. So I'm going to try and talk about it as organized as I possibly can. I have ADHD. I have the inattentive type. It's hard for me to keep focus, and I have anxiety, generalized anxiety and depression. That's not the reason though for our special needs life. About 7 years ago, I began a journey I didn't know I could handle. And, I don't see a lot of YouTube channels that are specific around congenital heart disease. I don't see a lot of moms or a lot of parents that vlog what it's like being a heart parent. And so I'm hoping that by making more videos on this channel and opening up more about our story might help other parents who have kiddos with congenital heart disease. So like I said, 7 years ago, I began a journey that I did not know I would be prepared for. When I was around 20 weeks along with my son Noah, I had to go in for a 3D ultrasound of him. I had to see a fetal medicine doctor to confirm, that everything was fine with him, given the fact that my oldest was born with choanal atresia, which I will talk about that in another video. They had to do an ultrasound of his face. They had to do an ultrasound of the rest of his body, just to make sure that we didn't have any surprises when he was born. Because when my daughter was born, she went completely blue. She stopped breathing, and they had to rush her to the NICU immediately. And they didn't want to have that with him. While they were doing the 3D ultrasound of him, the fetal doctor had come in and took a look at what was seen on the ultrasound. He walked out and he came back in, and he took a minute to explain to me what was going on, and that's when everything changed in my thought process of becoming a mom again for the second time. The fetal doctor had explained to me my son had a hole in his heart. They could see the hole and they could see the blood mixing. They also saw his stomach was on the opposite side. By the image of his heart with the blood mixing, there was a risk of him having what's called a hypoplastic left heart syndrome. It looked like a complicated heart condition. And the next question that came was whether to pursue this pregnancy or not pursue it, given the medical journey we would be on after. I went ahead and I gave this pregnancy a chance, and it was a very emotional roller coaster. I didn't know what I was gonna face when he was born. I wasn't sure if he would make it after being born. I had a lot of what ifs going through my mind throughout the whole pregnancy. I was preparing for all of the worst possibilities that could come with having a baby that was sick. So it made it very difficult preparing for him being born, and the idea of bringing him home right after birth was not even an option. I was told that he would be to surgery right after he was born, and that he would be spending some time in the hospital because of his condition. It was a lot, and it was kind of like a big, huge gut wrench feeling. Fast forward, give birth to him. I had to go into the operating room with him in a sterile environment because of how complex he was, and they wanted to be as safe as they could with him. I got to hold him, did not need any ventilator. He didn't need oxygen. He was doing pretty well for what he had. They had to bring him in to me a couple hours later and then take him over to Children's so they could start testing and they could start to monitor him within hours to days after birth, given his condition. And I would periodically call and check in and see how he was doing and want to know if there is any new updates on him. Because I was so worried about him, I didn't want to stay in the hospital any longer and recover. I also wanted to leave the hospital earlier. When I left the hospital, I did not go straight home. I went straight to the hospital. He was in the PICU, part of the hospital, to be monitored. When I got there, they had the O2 monitor on him, just to monitor how his sats are. And then within 2 days, his oxygen sats started to go down and he was starting to need oxygen through a cannula, and they had to take him down to have a sedated MRI where he was on a ventilator, and they found my son not only had one kind of heart defect, but he had 7. I can list all those. He had a double outlet right ventricle defect. He had an atrial septal defect. He had a ventricular septal defect. He had a total anomaly pulmonary venous return defect, pulmonary stenosis, which is narrowing of his pulmonary artery. And he was having difficulty getting enough oxygen to his lungs because there was a blockage in his pulmonary artery, and the flaps were not opening and closing as they should. They were stuck closed, so the blood was backing up in his pulmonary artery to go into his lungs. He had to go in for surgery right away within the next 4 days, and they had to do what's called a pulmonary artery banding, using a rubber band or some type of material to help the doors or the flaps open and close as blood flows, to also allow enough adequate blood to flow through into his lungs so he can breathe. Right after his first open heart surgery, Noah developed a clot on his portal vein, and what that's called is portal vein thrombosis. Because of that, he was put on a medication to help with the clotting, and then he had to follow up with a hematologist. They are blood doctors who just monitor the blood, they monitor clotting, they do tests, and they check where the clot was through an ultrasound, hypertension from it, and affecting his spleen. That was one hurdle that we had to jump through. And then at around 6 months old, my son started to get weak again. He got sick with rhinovirus, which is a really major cold. He spent a lot of time in the hospital when he was 6 months old battling rhinovirus, and then battling the beginning stages of heart failure. His heart was getting weak again because he was needing his second surgery. It's called bilateral bidirectional glint, so he had to have it done on both sides of his heart. Right before he went into surgery, he went into a tachycardia, which is a very fast heart rate. I was on my way to come see him because I had received a phone call from the floor that I needed to get down to the hospital right away because he was going through some distress. And when I got to the hospital, he wasn't in his room. They had just moved him over to the ICU part of the heart floor. And after his second surgery, he no longer had the high heart rate that he did have. They did find that there was an extra pathway in his heart. They had to put him on a medication to calm his heart rate down, and then monitor him. And then once he was stable enough, they could bring him back over to the step-down unit. They did find that there was an extra pathway in his heart that was contributing to some of his heart rates being elevated. That would later on create problems for him with his Fontan procedure. When I found out about all of Noah's heart problems, I found out that he would need 3-stage repairs of his heart. He would need the pulmonary banding, he would need the Glenn, and then he would need the Fontan procedure. Fontan is the last surgery of what he has, which is a single ventricle heart. It pumps with just one single ventricle because the other ventricle is not very strong, and it was already putting a lot of workload on the other ventricle. They just wanted to get it to pump as efficiently as it possibly could. So the Fontan just basically reroutes the flow of blood that is going out to his body. Before it was going out to his body mixed, he had oxygen rich and oxygen poor blood that were circulating throughout his body, and it was causing problems with his oxygen levels. His baseline used to be 60% rather than 90%. Our journey started out with just the medical side of it, and Noah's fully repaired. The Fontan surgery, though, was a lot more complex, as it involved a lot more and it affects a lot more than just his heart. When they did the Fontan, before they did it, they had to check his pressures in his lungs to make sure that his lungs could handle the new circulation. They had to coil off some of his collateral vessels because that way it helps with the blood flowing through. Typically, whenever there is a heart surgery, there is a effusion that goes on afterwards where there is a lot of fluid around the heart. And so kids and individuals have to be on Lasix to help with that fluid, diuretics. The Fontan, Noah had a lot of fluid retention. He had a lot of pleural effusion, and he was dropping a lot of fluid. And he didn't stay with a chest tube for just 3 weeks. It was more like 3 months. Although he had all this fluid on his lungs and around his heart and had a chest tube in, he was energetic. He was hyperactive, and you wouldn't know that he had gone through everything that he's been through. He had that chest tube in from August of 2020 until November of 2020 and got it out right before Thanksgiving. We thought we would have to go through a major test to see why he was holding on to so much fluid, because he had over 900 milliliters of fluid around his lungs, and that's a lot. Even before the Fontan, he had 24-hour heart monitors that he had to go through. Last couple of heart monitors were before his Fontan to make sure that the extra pathway was gone, or that if it was still there, we would have had to cool it off or burn it off. He had to go through a heart catheterization and a MRI with an electrical study to make sure that that pathway is gone or is not working. Once they did the Fontan, there would be no way of getting to that pathway, and it would create more problems in the future. Noah's fully repaired with his heart. That doesn't mean that he is cured. His heart condition will never be cured. That's the thing about congenital heart disease, is that it is never going to be cured. There is always palliative care. There is always different treatment options for every single condition with heart disease. For Noah's condition, the lifespan is 25 years of age before they need a heart transplant. But again, that is another video that I will go into more detail on at a later date. What got us into the name Our Special Needs Journey was because after Noah went through all of these heart problems, all of these surgeries, I was told about how children who have congenital heart disease eventually struggle with attention and focusing and staying organized, and it affects them when they get into school. As we were getting close to kindergarten, we were referred to neurology to have a neurologist do some testing and some evaluations. I sat through a telehealth meeting with his neurologist, who went over his evaluation and then shared with me the news about when he was first born. And this part I blocked out when I was going through everything with his heart. I did not pay attention to this part of his testing because it had to do with his brain, and my mind was so set on his heart and everything that was going on with him that I was not even aware of his brain issues. She shared with me that he underwent an MRI when he was first born, and they did it on his brain, and they found some white matter on his brain that could potentially put him at risk for developmental delays as he gets older and some other executive functioning issues. He was at risk for ADHD, he was at risk for ADD and developmental delays. His neurologist could see that there was language delays with him. She diagnosed him with mixed receptive and expressive language delays, which means that Noah does not receive information the way that we would. When you talk to him about something, sometimes it doesn't always stick. And then expressing himself is hard. He cannot verbally express how he feels. When he is expressing himself, he is doing it in a behavior. So it was a difficult time when I found out that he had brain damage. But every moment I've had that has been shocking, I've had to pull myself back together and just keep moving forward, as that's all you can do as a special needs mom. We get into kindergarten and we start running into behavior problems. He was very impulsive. He was doing things such as sticking his fingers in the sharpener. He just was very unsafe. I had to keep picking him up from school. I had to keep picking him up from his before and after school program. I'd have to leave my job and go get him. I would be in the middle of a client and I would get a phone call that I have to go pick him up. And it made things very, very difficult and very, very hard for me to work. But I tried. I pushed as hard as I could to stay employed. But I was also stressed to the max because I was more concerned about what he was doing while he wasn't with me, how safe he was. I reached out to the neurologist and I was like, I don't know what to do, and needed him to see another clinic. So then neurology referred us over to the pediatric developmental behavior clinic, where we got in with a pediatrician that was trained in neurological type of conditions. So ADHD, ADD, autism, all of that. First appointment, meeting him, she could tell he was a very complex kiddo. We're not just talking about his heart. And I've always been so used to being told that he's complex just from his heart. And to hear it from a neurological standpoint, I was just blown away. It was overwhelming for me for a moment. I've learned be overwhelmed for the moment, but then you got to pull yourself back together and keep pushing through. I had to do all of the parent-teacher survey questions. He was in a program at the time that was having problems with him as well, didn't understand him. They did rating scales, and then finally his pediatrician put everything together and diagnosed him with ADHD and ADD combined, to also flow in with his mixed receptive and expressive language delays with recommendations, and then referred us to the autism side of their clinic, where we would go through a dual diagnostic testing for him. Finally, in April of last year, we did that. We started his testing for his autism, which was a 2-part appointment. The first part was in the office with a behavioral technician, and then the second part was telehealth, and it was at home to see how he is at home with me and how he communicates and how he plays. The biggest thing that really hit me was Noah doesn't always make eye contact when you talk to him. He doesn't always look at you. When you're talking to him, sometimes he's just looking to the side, and when he's playing with you, it's the same. And she pointed out to me that he wasn't looking at me in the eyes when he was talking to me. It was kind of like that emotional moment, and it wasn't because my child is disabled and has autism or showing the signs of autism, and that's a bad thing. It was more of a emotional moment, like I finally felt seen. I felt like my voice was heard, because for so long, I kept telling people in the program that there's something else going on with my child. He is not being disruptive just because he wants to be disruptive. There is something neurologically wrong with him. So to finally be seen, to finally be heard, it felt good. That began our diagnosis of functioning autism. Noah was diagnosed with level 2 autism, which means that he needs a little bit more support in communication, in transitions. He struggles a lot with communication. He struggles a lot with transitions and understanding what he's doing next. And because of the fact that he was diagnosed with ADHD, ADD, and mixed receptive and expressive language delays with high functioning autism, kind of pushed me into the realm of, I don't want to just base his story on his heart problems, that I wanted to combine it into one and talk about his autism, his ADHD, bring awareness to what it is. When I think of autism, I only thought of it as just communication, nonverbal, but there wasn't a whole lot of understanding around the communication aspects of understanding what's being told to them or how they struggle with expressing themselves. It's a more in-depth thing than just they don't talk, they communicate. And that just because my child is making eye contact right now, but then later on they're not, doesn't mean that they're not autistic. Bringing awareness to the fact that autism is such a big spectrum and each end of the spectrum is different. It's the same with congenital heart disease. I talk about Noah's heart problems. People think it is hypoplastic left heart syndrome, but then I tell them that it is not, that it is more of a single ventricle heart defect of his double outlet right ventricle that is causing us to have to go in the route of treatment that would be considered hypoplastic left heart syndrome with the same lifespan. I try and get comfortable with making YouTube videos and trying to edit it the best I can and make it interesting, but it's hard because I'm not big on making videos and talking. I know it's really good to vlog and talk about these things because I know that there might be somebody that's struggling right now who just started this journey and they don't know how to handle it. I'm still learning about my son's congenital heart defects 7 years later. I'm still learning how everything works and understanding autism. Being a parent of a child with autism changes your view so much on autism. When you go from being a sibling of someone with autism to having your own child with autism, it definitely changes everything. And then having ADHD yourself, the inattentive type, makes it a lot more harder to comprehend everything. As far as my generalized anxiety disorder, the thing about being a heart mom or a medical parent is that it brings on mental health issues. The trips to the doctor appointments for follow-up care on his heart is hard because even though this is just a follow-up appointment, some of these follow-up appointments involve ultrasounds, EKGs, oxygen sat checks, and other type of follow-up care when you have a child with congenital heart disease. You never know with those appointments at what point you're going to get hit with news that's not so good news. That is when the flow of blood changes or something stops functioning the way that it needs to. As a special needs heart parent, medical parent, we struggle a lot when we go into these appointments. When we walk into the hospitals, it's like our anxiety is at a heightened level. We function as special needs medical parents. It doesn't mean that it's not hard. Feel free to comment down below anything that you guys want to comment, any questions. If you have a story that you want to share down below, comment. I would love to talk more on this channel and connect with people. I don't know where I see this channel going. I do know that having it and talking about being a special needs parent is very important. I think it's very helpful for me to get everything out, to be transparent. With my ADHD, I lose track of things and I forget what I'm talking about in the moment, but then it comes back later on, and so it's just jumbled up in the video. I'm just trying to be myself, and I hope you guys enjoy that with with me. Anything that you guys would like to see on this channel. My reels are all over the place. A lot of the reels I do post are from TikTok, so that might be why some of the videos don't look the greatest. I think that's it. That's all I have today on this video.